Amusement park workers, what is the stupidest thing you've seen a guest do? Last year a guy climbed over a fence at Kings Island to get his keys that fell out of his pocket, and he was hit by the coaster / someone's foot and later died in the hospital. I got one. I worked at Knott's Berry Farm in 1999. I was working in a souvenir shop next to the Ghost Rider, a very popular roller coaster. At peak times the wait could be 4 to 5 hours. I'm working and in walks 2 crying children. Turned out their parents went on Ghost Rider hours before, telling them to wait for them. They were terrified they'd been abandoned and all they could think to do was have someone call their grandma in Mexico to come get them. Security took them and I heard they went and found the parents in the line and pulled them out to care for their damn kids. I don't know if they got kicked out of the park or anything though. The park I worked at back in the day had a ride that was newish at the time and fairly popular. It had to close when it rained as the brakes wouldn't work properly when they got wet and dead guests would be bad for business. One day it started raining and I got the word to shut it down. As per standard procedure, I put a chain across the entrance, then placed a barrel-shaped garbage can in front of the chain, and lastly a big A-frame sign that read in giant red letters, "This ride is closed," in front of the garbage can. I then went to the loading area to wait out the rain with the rest of the crew. We watched a guy notice that there was no line for this ride and run to the entrance. We saw him read the sign or look at it anyway, look at the garbage can and look at the chain. He then moved the sign to one side, moved the garbage can to the other side, unclipped the chain and removed it and ran through the line to the loading area. He was utterly shocked when he was told that the ride was closed and he couldn't get on. On the train, right after I said keep all hand inside and before going into the tunnel and then the frat boy who wanted to scare the girls with them by hitting the side of the tunnel. He didn't scare them but he did break his arm. Worked at Dorney Park in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Did not see the event but saw the aftermath. We had a line jumping policy where if you line jump you're escorted from the park. So some guests line jumped and were tossed. It was a group of maybe 10 people to start who were yelling and screaming at security. More and more members of their bus trip started with security too, supposedly 50 to 100 more. Got so bad they started fighting and pretty much caused a riot outside the park. Multiple cops showed up and they shut down the park. No one could enter or leave. Injuries were reported but nothing major. After that the park had armed security. This woman came to my pizza stall and instead of ordering an overpriced pizza slice, she pulled out a full frozen salmon, asked me if she could keep it in my refrigerator while she was doing rides. When I said no, she insisted to speak to my manager because it was apparently unfair and that we had a lot of space in our walk-in. Not a guest, a fellow worker. We were cleaning the big slide, metal that you ride down on a burlap sack, with kerosene because they put the wrong sort of wax on it and it was sticky. We're carefully jamming our feet into the joints, wiping hot metal in the sun with a rag on one hand and a can of kerosene in the other. Fellow carny decides to do it faster by sitting on the kerosene-soaked rag and sliding down. EMS was called to deal with his burns. I used to sell novelty toys at a popular theme park in SoCal. It was around 9 to 10 a.m. and the park was empty but I was blowing bubbles with a toy we sell as we are expected to do. I had a guest come up to me and ask me if I could blow the bubbles in another direction because they were getting in her face. I told her I can't control the wind but she could move. She reported me to the main office and my boss basically laughed at the situation. Dipping their fingers in the water on a log flume. Those boats hit the side, you're going to break fingers at a minimum. If we saw you do it, you were getting shouted at. If you kept doing it, you were getting kicked out. Worked for the mouse. First day back open from COVID, a lady brings a tabletop open flame grill and starts cooking hot dogs unmasked for her family at Disney Springs. Then wondered why and fought with security about the reasons she was getting kicked out. In my servitude for the mouse, I had a woman yell at me in February because the hotel pool was closed. It was 35 degrees with 15-mile-an-hour winds. When I explained that the pool was closed because you'd get hypothermia, she insisted that Florida doesn't get cold. That's when I just called my manager for her and had Lon handle it. Lon enjoyed irate guests and asking them questions until they realized how stupid they were being. Didn't always work. To me it was stupid but I guess this lady thought it was smart. I worked in food and this lady came to the park by herself, came to our restaurant and ordered chicken. The chicken was perfectly fine but she complained about it so I gave her a new plate with a larger portion. Still not happy, she complained to my manager and she gave her a refund after the second plate. Lady then wants to speak with my manager's manager, so 2 area managers come in and they have a long conversation and she was still not satisfied so they sent her up to customer service. I happened to know the area manager from outside of work and asked what was the deal with that lady. He said she knew the company policy about always keeping the customer satisfied and knew they would bend over backwards for her. She ended up getting a handful of free tickets for her family just for coming in and complaining virtually all day. It just seemed like a waste of time to me to go that route. Season tickets really were not that expensive back then, late 90s. Lady pushing a stroller when a duck falls from the sky directly into the stroller. She then pushes the stroller roughly 6 feet away from her and starts yelling, "Get away from my baby," as if the duck understands English. Stupidest question I've ever been asked, and brace yourselves, this one's a doozy. I'm sitting in my tour guide seat on a tram at a certain theme park in SoCal. The tour hasn't started yet. I'm playing a media clip as the tram finishes loading. An older lady in the front row reaches forward and taps me on my knee. "Excuse me, miss?" "Yes." She points off to the San Gabriels to our right. "Are those mountains?" "I'm sorry, what?" "Are those mountains?" "Yes. Yes, they are." She sat back and nodded and didn't bother me for the rest of the tour. I worked for a small amusement park in the suburbs of Chicago 20 years ago. I once broke up a fight between two women who were fighting because one cut in front of the other in the funnel cake line. When I say fighting one, I mean one woman had grabbed the other's hair, twisted her down and was pummeling her in the face. I grabbed that woman and threw her up against a wall next to us. Security then arrived, both were kicked out. I have stories from that place. Pay $37 for a hot dog and a Coke. Not a worker but was on whitewater rapid boat ride. The boat was circular and was stuck spinning in the water flow, bumping against a barrel designed to propel boats forward. A guy reached out to punch/push off the spinning barrel. He broke his wrist. Worked as an on-job trainer/photographer at Discovery Cove, the other SeaWorld park where you can legally swim with the dolphins and also drink unlimited shitty draft beer until you puke it up into an artificial coral reef. And had a woman come storming up to me and insisting that the trainers were demanding she engage in outrageous behavior if she wanted to participate in the dolphin interaction. Come to find out, the outrageous behavior was entering the water so as to be able to actually reach and thus touch the aforementioned dolphin. She was insistent that we could bring the dolphin out for her to touch, which you can kind of arrange briefly? No. She wanted us to do an entire interaction with the dolphin beach the entire time. Her rationale as to why she wouldn't just get in the water was, I kid you not, that she hadn't thought she would need a swimsuit to swim with the dolphins. Other highlights include the guest who asked completely seriously, "When do you guys drain the tanks and make them fight?" "What?" "When do you guys put all the whales and dolphins into the big pond and make them fight? You guys do that, right?" Another guest inquired within 30 minutes of me starting my first ever solo shift about renting a parrot, then became violently enraged when I told him I'd need to ask another team member both if we rented parrots, and if today was actually a discount parrot rental day. He very quickly stormed off before I could answer, all the while still yelling and at the same time angrily attempting to eat a turkey leg with some degree of difficulty. We did not, in fact, rent parrots, nor were they for rent at a discounted rate on that Tuesday or any other. My favorite groups were tourists who would ask for directions to attractions that did not exist in our park, or in any of the theme parks in Florida for that matter. Children seem to frequently confuse us with Animal Kingdom, but only in the context of, "Wow, this place is so much worse than I thought it would be." Whole job was a freaking trip. Not an employee. About 20 years ago, I was in line for a ride at Worlds of Fun in Kansas City. I was probably 12 or 13. There was a group of about 8 girls around the same age hanging back in the line and waving everyone on. Go ahead. We could tell something was weird. Park maintenance eventually showed up. They cleared everyone out of the area. One girl from the group was still there, leaned over the barrier, the type amusement parks have to designate where the lines goes, similar to railing on a deck. This girl had shoved her kneecap in a gap between the rails and couldn't get it back out. Her foot was behind her just dangling, with a bunch of dudes trying to pull this metal apart ever so slightly. She didn't look like she was in any sort of pain, just humiliated. She was still stuck when I got on the roller coaster. I am happy to report that I was there about 6 years ago, so they must have been able to get her out. "Hey guys, backpacks have to go in the free lockers over there." As I gestured to a huge wall of lockers. "How much do the free lockers cost? Where are they?" Saw a mom and son sitting on a bench. The son was maybe 7 years oldish. The mom is looking the opposite way of the child. A seagull lands right next to the kid. He literally picks it up. The bird doesn't freak out or fly away. He turns back to his mom and says, Mom, look what I have." She turns and her face is in complete shock and starts saying, put it down. Is that stupid? Not necessarily. Just never seen a bird get that close and stay calm throughout. Used to work at the ticket booths. One of our jobs was to stand outside and make sure people didn't jump the chains. Then we would have to call the medical team when a guest would try to jump the chains anyways, then slam their face into the ground. I'll try to keep this vague just in case this blows up. I worked at an amusement park in my early 20s while I was going to college. I worked on a few different rides in my time there, but most of my time was spent running an aerial carousel. For those uninitiated in park speak, that's the official name for a Dumbo-style ride. For the most part, one loved it because I was never busy, but my ride was also one of the only rides in the whole park without a mandatory ride height. To ride alone you had to be 4 foot, but any kid could ride with their parents as long as they sat in the middle of a 3-person car. And as a general rule that was fine. But I swear at least once a day I had some butthole try to break the rules. They tried to lift the kid up Lion King style, they tried to lap sit after they were up in the air, or they let the small child out of their seat belt and allowed them to lean precariously out of their vehicle. All kinds of stupid stuff. And it was infuriating because I know it just takes one slip for a kid to fall and get seriously injured or die. That thing went at least 10 foot up. But people always acted like I was a jerk. It's not really a stupidest person story, but the collective stupidity has always stuck with me. Every day at least one person risked their child's life for no real reason other than it was cool. This kind of reminds me of going to somewhere when I was little and my parents trying to find ways to trick me onto a ride I wasn't tall enough for. Thinking back, I'm horrified, like those restrictions are there for a reason. Gosh, you are making me realize I'm so glad I didn't take my 1-year-old to Disney with the family later this month. She is so squirrely and slips seatbelts in the blink of an eye. Nightmare to imagine trying to wrangle her while up in the air on Dumbo. I can't imagine doing that intentionally. Horrifying. Super windy fall day, and an old man marched up to me and said, Walt would be spinning in his grave to see all these leaves on the ground. Where do folks complain? I two-finger pointed to City Hall and off he went. I worked at a magical kingdom some years ago. I have a lot of stories of entitled guests and some wonderful people that I have met over my time there, but one stands out. I was working with the ice cream carts and I worked at every single cart in that park. On 80 I was working in at the popcorn and churro cart in front of Storybook Circus, and our carts could see the Dumbo ride. It was not too busy in the parks that day and most of the rides were walk-on. Well, as Dumbo was loading up its next group of people, a woman screamed in horror. We turned around and watched as this woman picked up her toddler and ran away from the ride. We thought that someone might have pooped on the ride or maybe left something nasty on it and just didn't tell anyone. The cast member went to look, then told everyone to leave and was contacting their leadership team. Well, 2 minutes after the leadership team showed up, we were all nosy. Even some of the guests that wanted snacks were watching along with us as an entire group of Disney security showed up and surrounded the elephant car on the ride. Then 2 Orange County officers showed up, gloves on and a paper bag. All of us were so curious, what the hell did they see in the car? What was going on? They all talked about 10 minutes when my leadership showed up and saw that as we were helping guests that we were also watching this unfold. We told them about the woman screaming and we didn't know what was on the ride. Then we heard a man shouting, "It's mine, it's mine." This man ran to the ride and explained that what was on the ride was his. Then we all saw it as the cop lifted it up from the car. It was a handgun. This man had it concealed, and this was before Disney installed the metal detectors, when all they did was check your bags and strollers. He had it in a holster underneath his shirt, and when he was on the ride with his kid it fell out. We watched as the family was escorted out of the park with Orange County right behind the dad and Disney security behind the family. A woman once elbowed me in the skull, giving me a concussion and sending me to the hospital, because she needed to be first in line to meet Anna and Elsa. Wasn't employees by the mouse, but was at his park. On the monorail. We stop at the hotel we are staying at, I think it was the Polynesian but don't remember. Lady gets on and asks like 3 or 4 people how to get to SeaWorld. Bless their hearts, someone even told her stay on the monorail till the last stop at Epcot, get off and make a left. Said lady actually believed her. Well, that one is sadly common. That and asking where Harry Potter World is. And that's just the people who are from the US and don't know the different parks. I had a group from another country ask how long it would take to get to New York. Not out of curiosity, but because they thought it could be a day trip they could swing the next morning. Oh. I didn't work there, but I have a funny story from one time when I was on the Tatsu coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain about 10 years ago. It's a suspension coaster where you strap in standing up, then tilt forward so you are basically hanging underneath the track face down like a hang glider. We get to the end of the ride where it stops right before we go into the station, and we're just hanging face down about 3 feet from the metal floor. This girl 2 rows in front of me tried to take out her phone and dropped it. She was reaching for it for about 30 seconds before we started moving back into the station. I heard her asking the attendant, and he said she would have to wait until the end of the day to get it, after the rides are shut down. From the stupid guest's perspective. While in line for Rise of the Resistance in Disney World, I started fiddling with some buttons to get a reaction. A cast member broke character and said, "Dude, those real buttons." I still think about this and die inside a little every time. I worked at a food pavilion in a small amusement park as teen making fresh cut fries. We had a condiment cart towards the middle of the pavilion. There was the usual fare: ketchup, ranch, honey mustard, salt and malt vinegar. A guy came up and complained the vinegar tasted real bad and bitter. A coworker asked him to bring the bottle he used. Here the dumb but sprayed his fries with a bottle of cleaner that got left on the stand on accident. The amount of people who forget their babies count as people is astounding. Every day working in Fantasyland, I'd have to recount and regroup guests because, obviously, the baby doesn't count. Fine, I'll cram all 5 of you into one Dumbo elephant then and tell me after how that worked out for you. Partner works at Disneyland. A customer complained that it was raining because she thought the park had an invisible dome that prevented rain. We had closed off a path for a serious medical emergency. It was hot and the guests were cranky about walking around via a different route, so I was sent to the barricade to back up the one staff member holding the fort. I was nicely explaining it's an emergency blah blah and most people understood. This one woman was losing it. She needed to go that way right now, it was the fastest way to some show she wanted to see, etc. She even told me, what's the big deal, she could just step over the person who had the emergency. And, well, why could paramedics go through? While we're there, several sheriff's deputies come rushing up escorting EMS. This woman sees the open barricade, dives past it and runs full tilt into the deputy who'd paused on the other side. And she doesn't have the sense to apologize. She said something like, "Let me through." He was not amused. Last I saw them, the sheriff was escorting her away from the barricade toward the park security office while her screaming kids trailed behind. We reopened in 10 minutes. She got tossed out of a theme park over a 10-minute wait. My whole family were nearly killed when a ride operator failed to tell us about a tunnel. It was the last train back to the car park and they let us ride in an open-top carriage standing up as there was nowhere else to sit and no other option to get back. It was a Santa Grotto experience thing. We had never gone on this train before. My dad only just spotted the tunnel in time for us all to duck down. So it's not always people being stupid, sometimes it's the people in charge of them. My time to shine. Worked at one as a teen. Saw a huge fight between 2 women, we're talking one lost part of her scalp with hair-pulling fight. I was in a booth that directly faced it. Like a single-file line of employees came running to respond. Before they could intervene though, someone pulled out pepper spray. In an amusement park. Which was crowded that day. Over a dozen people including kids affected. My boss got it full in the face. A friend had to go to the hospital after inhaling some. Just chaos. Leash kids were largely upsetting. Parents literally dragging kids. I only saw one where I was like, yeah, that's needed, in all the time I worked. Our park had a log ride. The log goes up a small hill, splashes down into water, loops around to go up a larger hill, splashes down and then returns to start. A lady with her 2 toddlers decided the first hill was way too scary and bailed before reaching the second hill. Except they exited the log on the inside of the loop, leaving running water between them and any exit. 18-year-old me thought the best solution was to toss the toddlers one at a time across the water and then have the mom leap across. In hindsight, I'm lucky we weren't sued. Break into the park by climbing over a fence, climb into the alligator enclosure, then evade security by climbing back over the fence to escape the park. Then post the whole thing on his YouTube channel leading to his arrest. Worked a short stint at a kid's car ride in summer 2016. Policy was the kid needed to be 48 inches to drive, but can be any height to ride alongside them. When I saw parents in line with toddlers about a foot tall, I guessed to myself whether or not they would try to put them in the driver's seat. More often than not, they did, and we had to stop the whole ride flow until they knocked it off. What's the difference between 12 and 48? Apparently not a whole lot. I worked at a kiddie amusement park when I was in college, and there are so many stories from parents screaming at me when their kid was too short to be safe, to teens dangling from the carousel mechanisms like monkey bars. Stupidest question I ever got from someone was when I was operating a little train that went around the property. Why doesn't the train have a steering wheel? I struggled for a moment, trying to come up with an answer that wouldn't sound rude or sarcastic. What I finally said was, it's got tracks. Wait in line for hours. At Universal Studios Florida when I thought I had a pocket zippered shut. It wasn't. They had me ride the ride again, then told me to hang out near the lost and found desk at closing time. I went to ride a few more rides, then sat and watched as the ride ops came up with their bags of dropped stuff. They found it. I also once dropped a small toy off of Star Tours at Tokyo Disney and they have one of those really long pickers and were able to grab it directly.